You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and this is 6 Degrees of John Keel.
Hello and welcome to the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Barbara Fisher, and with me tonight is...
Morgana.
Again, she's here. Hooray, 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 it happened. And back with us tonight is...
Steve Berg. Hello, my friends.
There he is. He came back. And you know what? We're not going to just spend the whole time talking general stuff. We're going to actually talk about what we meant to talk about, which is weirdness in Nebraska or strange Nebraska.
Yep.
So right now, though, Nebraska and Ohio and everything east of, say, California got struck by crazy snow. So, but you're good. Your house is standing.
Yep.
Good.
Yep. You know, like you,
Good.
we experienced some, it felt like, Mars is a cold planet? Yes. I was going to say, I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Huh?
Oh, yeah.
No, it felt like...
It has no atmosphere to speak of, so yeah, it's really cold.
Yeah, so it felt like a foreign planet outside. It was, negative minus 44 wind chill. And that's not great. I like to get outside and mess around. So I was locked in and, after getting my fill of reading books, I started to freak out. But it's nice here now. It's like 46 degrees. So, it feels like a nice spring day to me. I was actually outside in a T-shirt and shorts. I'm that Midwest guy who goes out in shorts if it's past 40 degrees.
See, yeah.
My boyfriend
you're the
is
kind
that
of guy
man as well.
Yep. Your boyfriend. My kid Fox is like, "What's wrong with these people?" I said, "Midwest. They can't help it.
We can't help it.
Their legs are impervious to cold."
It's true.
I don't understand it. I'm a hillbilly from the hills, and we wear pants, and that's what we do.
Yeah, my wife thinks I'm crazy too. So
That's because it's cold. Do you also stare at the tornadoes?
yeah, I used to as a kid.
As they're
this is
coming?
weird. I used to lay lunch meat on my driveway when we had tornado warnings because I would set up a video camera, and I was like 11 or 12 to try to get a good photograph or a good video of a tornado. And in my head, I'm like, well, if I leave lunch meat out of my driveway, then it will attract a tornado. I didn't really believe that, but it was also, I guess I was like performing some magic as a kid, like trying to entice the tornado with a little ritual, I was an oddball.
Speechless. I'm speechless. That's amazing. So, tornadoes love lunch meat. I'm just going to write it down.
Well, I was never successful, but it doesn't mean they don't. I should start trying again now that I'm back here.
You should.
Yeah.
I mean, I would lay them further away from your house than your driveway in case it works.
Yeah, I'm not looking to
but...
come to me. Yeah. Luckily, Omaha is a big enough city where it produces enough heat that tornadoes generally kind of go around us. It's just like all the small towns around us just get pulverized, unfortunately.
And any trailer park, because tornadoes,
they're done. They love trailer parks.
Trailer parks.
They actually, what's weird though? They do. It's just that's actually true. I mean, it is so crazy.
Oh yeah.
In Iowa and Nebraska, growing up, you just be like, well, the tornado, Nebraska or Omaha averted another, crazy tornado, but the trailer parks in Iowa got destroyed. And
it's like, don't live in a trailer park in the Midwest, y'all.
No.
Just don't. Maybe you can be in a trailer away from all the other trailers, because then they're not as likely to get you. But
I think that would increase your odds.
No way.
Yep. Too dangerous.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yep.
I think so too. All right. Well, what is weird about Nebraska?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going. I'm going to kind of because. Well, we kind of, it's one of these states that you really don't hear a whole lot about. It's like in I think like Iowa had like Brad Steiger, and so he wrote a lot about Iowa. He was a native, lived in Iowa his whole life, and so even though he wrote about everything globally, under the sun, he would definitely really kind of talk about Iowa. And Wisconsin has multiple great researchers who have been documenting that place forever. Minnesota does, Illinois, Ohio, but Nebraska,
Indiana, even
Indiana, absolutely, Colorado, all these states in the Midwest, or pretty much all over the country, have had some. There is historical documentation out there, but Nebraska, for some reason, really just has not had a ton of documentation, and we have a lot of weird stuff. I mean, like anywhere else, I like as a kid, I was always like, well, gosh, did the paranormal and high strangeness just skip over this state? Why me? I was upset about it. But as the internet came around and one was able to start going through the databases of old newspapers all over every county in Nebraska, I started discovering a ton of stuff, and including Bigfoot, which a lot of people, who, especially the flesh and blood Bigfoot, people are like, Bigfoot, it's impossible for a Bigfoot to be in Nebraska. But I'm here to tell you, we have had a lot of sightings going all the way back to the 1870s. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't have evidence that these occurred. But when you hear these stories go back 130 years,
Yeah.
I mean, it raises my eyebrow. I think, perhaps there's something to this pattern. And that was before, there was even something called Bigfoot. It was they just described it as a 9-foot tall wild man with a lot of hair. So
yeah.
And that kind of wild man archetype goes throughout almost every state in the lower 48 has a story somewhere in their papers about this. Ohio, most definitely, obviously.
We've got all kinds of stuff here.
Yeah, and Ohio actually, not to get off the Nebraska thread, but isn't the third most Bigfoot sightings in history? It's up there, and people.
I think we're actually fourth. I think we're fourth.
But in my heart,
but we are up there.
Yeah,
yeah, that's a lot, right? I mean, that's crazy. But so what's weird about Nebraska is, one, to me, that it has not been documented very well. But we have a long history of UFOs, contactee experiences, cryptids, being giant black cats. Weird little walking, 3-foot tall raccoon looking Putchwuckies. So we even have a lake monster here. But I'll start just kind of going through because there's this. What I've kind of done with looking at Nebraska is I've sort of taken the John Keel approach, where kind of take a small-ish microcosm of a place and really, really study the history. Go back and just try to focus on a chunk of it. Because if even though Nebraska's just one state, it's overwhelming to really focus on the whole state for me. So where I'm from Eastern Nebraska, and that is kind of where the most documentation that I can find has occurred. So Eastern Nebraska is it's right along the Missouri River, which is one of the country's big major rivers, and so it goes all down from the tippy top of northern Nebraska all the way down to the south. And right along the Missouri River is where the vast majority of high strangeness has occurred and is still occurring. So what is weird about Nebraska? Well, there's this place called Odo County, which is, probably 40 miles away from Omaha. And in the 1870s, there was this little, they found some coal. We're not a real big coal state, but they found some coal along the Missouri River. And so it became for a little while this mining town. And when this mining, and this is in the middle of nowhere, so it had no population, but until people started coming there for work in the mines.
Right.
And when they started coming there for work in the mines, they were digging up a bunch of stuff, digging into hillsides, trying to extract all this creosote. What's it called?
Creosote.
The creosote. Yes, I believe it was creosote. They started having these weird experiences, and a lot of it was and they're digging.
We all know. Yes. We all know. Don't be digging. Don't do that.
Because if you're digging out of the earth, you're going to get a Bigfoot. You're going to get lights.
And that's
and you're right on a major river, which is also for whatever reason.
River valleys
with weird.
You really can't when you actually. I'm hoping to post some videos that I've been taking down at this area. You really can't get more liminal than this area. It really just is bizarre in so many different ways. But to kind of get back to my little story, so Minersville was a thriving little mining town, and then there was, but we have very small like mines and very small like karst cave systems. So grown male adults really weren't able to mine, so they were using like 12-year-olds.
Oh, that's always good.
Awesome, right?
That's
and
great.
There was a mining accident in, I believe, the late 1890s and killed like 44 children who were mining.
Oh.
So they shut down the mine. It was like this big tragedy. But the weird stuff kind of started to increase. And we're talking orange orbs of light over the Missouri River that people said, according to these newspaper articles and the stories that I've heard from the local historian, people were seeing them on the regular. Like it became something at first where people were going out and watching the lights and go, oh, cool. But they got bored by it because it happens so often. There's a wonderful story about this schoolhouse of 18 children and 2 teachers who were being circled by a 9-foot-long black puma-looking cat. And that's an old newspaper story. And then there was just a ton of what I would kind of call a Bigfoot type creature. They described it as an 8-foot-tall man who was muscle-bound, covered in hair. They just didn't have the term Bigfoot or Sasquatch back then. But that was being seen so often that the mayor of Odo County, which is now called Nebraska City, hired all these men armed them with shotguns and torches, and was paying them at the time big money to go hunt the black cat and the Bigfoot. Because supposedly they were taking livestock, killing chickens, and threatening. They were hanging around the schoolhouse a lot. But this area, so back in kind of like the late 1800s, there was a ton of stuff going on. Then the area was pretty much abandoned because there was no work. The mine shut down. So then I'm going to kind of fast forward to the 1960s, right exactly when John Keel was in Point Pleasant in 66 and 67. When he was in Point Pleasant looking at all the, Mothman stuff
Weirdies.
And the weird stuff that was transpiring around the Mothman, which is, kind of the most interesting stuff. We were having many of the same things. Flying humanoids, structured craft landing, lights going over the Missouri River where people like on the barges who were, going down the river, like shipping stuff, they would be like shining spotlights on the lights going
just
clearly,
like in the Ohio River.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the one of the things is now there's our nuclear plant right down where Minersville used to be. So when I went down there for the first time to go check it out, I was like, oh my God, I'm looking at a mirror of Point Pleasant. Right by a major river, right where a tragedy happened, and a nuclear power plant. And the same sort of phenomenon was actually happening back in the 60s. So there's a guy, and you may have heard of him. He's kind of he was a pretty big player in the ufological field in the 80s and 90s. A guy named Raymond Boeche. Nick Redfern wrote kind of a popular book called Final Events, and he's kind of the protagonist in that book.
Yeah.
And Ray was, a really interesting, is an interesting guy because he in the 80s and 90s had this Fortean Society. And so that's just kind of like a little preview of who Ray is, so you have some context. But in the 60s, when this stuff was going on, Ray was 15 years old, and he called John Keel. Like he just somehow because he had kind of like they were like pen pals, and John Keel was just nice. He would write back this 15-year-old who was really into his work. Well, he finally got John on the phone and was describing exactly what was happening to him in Nebraska, not knowing anything about what was going on in West Virginia. And John Keel goes, well, I have a new term for this stuff. It's called window area, and I think you have one. So
that's
Keel
amazing.
actually told Ray,
that's so cool.
And it was kind of when he was coming up with that kind of concept. And so, but that really wasn't hardly documented anywhere. To me, that's pretty major because there was a lot for about a 2-year period, 66 and 67. There was so much stuff happening. I've gotten friends, Ray has been super nice to send me a bunch of files and old press clippings, but we had some really weird stuff. There was multiple flying humanoid. I'll go into more detail about that because I'll tell you about my favorite flying humanoid case we have. But Yeah, we had flying humanoids, Bigfoot type creatures, and the black cats returned in the 60s, and they had structured craft and lights in the sky. So that area of Minersville is of particular interest to me because there is newspaper documentation of the stuff, and there is kind of a confluence of all the paranormal manifestations that we know and love. So it's and it's kind of one of these things where it's like it's super hard. I've gotten to be really good friends with the local historian of Nebraska City in that county, and she's told me, she's like, I hear weird stuff all the time, but people still do not want to talk about it. They won't put their names out. She's like, so we're still having tons of stuff, tons of odd occurrences, but people just don't talk about it. They don't send it into MUFON. I mean, like, it's like,
right.
I think if you go solely by like what the, BFRO, the Bigfoot reporting site, or MUFON, or these database places, you would not think there's that much stuff going on. But I feel like the percentage of people actually reporting anything has to be like 3 or 4. It's got to be very low. I wouldn't feel like I would need to report it to MUFON if I had a UFO experience. Like, I don't think I would.
Yeah.
I would probably call you guys and talk about it. But so
yeah, true.
So the Myersville area is very interesting to me. So I'll kind of like go in and start like talking about some of the particular cases around that general area. There is this wonderful case of, and John Keel and Valet, I think, both wrote about this. In Falls City, Nebraska, which is just south of Minersville, there was this dude named Mr. Hanks. It's an alias, but he was driving home one night back into Falls City, coming back in from work, and he sees something flying in the air. He just, kind of like, oh, that's odd and interesting because it's rather large. And then as it gets closer, he kind of notices that it is like a gray, leathery skinned creature with ice blue eyes and wings that are like kind of like lightly flapping. And then so he's like, wait, what? So he stops his car, gets out of the car to look at this thing. And then all of a sudden he becomes paralyzed. He cannot move. And he feels just horrified with this feeling of dread. And it starts getting closer. And when he gets closer, he notices more details of this thing. And the wings on the thing were not like organic or skin. It was like an apparatus made of like a grid-like material with a shoulder harness. And then in the middle, there was like a breastplate with like lights and knobs and dials. Like it was some kind of like crude old computer that was on his chest. Wow. And this is like, I think, gosh, this happened in 57. Yeah, even before the flap in the 60s. And so that was way before that kind of like, technology was seen very much.
Right.
And then it starts having some kind of like problems, and it starts flapping its like hands and feet, which the hands and feet looked like the tails of doves, or the wings of doves, I should say. And
That's fascinating.
And then it gets really low to the ground, and then it flies off, and the guy becomes unparalyzed, and he was so traumatized by this. He ended up saying like he was like in his late 40s at the time. He said for the rest of his life, he always had 2 or 3 jobs to avoid sleeping. And he said he probably slept 1 or 2 hours the rest of his life. He's like, my whole life became about avoiding sleep or avoiding any downtime, because when I had downtime, I thought about this stuff and it horrified me. So it really did a number on this guy, and he was kind of never the same. And which is, I love this case, but I am kind of sad for this poor man whose life was so disrupted.
Yeah.
And he said it disrupted his family life. He's like, he actually said it impaired his ability to be a good father and stuff. And I was like, wow, that's really. But, I guess you can see something that's shocking,
Yeah, it would be a horrible shock to the system. And for some reason, I think that a lot of sightings pre-60s and during the 60s, they were really traumatizing for people.
They were.
I don't know if the phenomena has shifted a little bit.
Yeah.
As time has gone on to be like less horrifying, or if people's mental elasticity has changed,
or it's just that we've heard enough about weirdness.
Yeah, maybe we've been primed for it.
There's a thought balloon in your head that you can hang it on to. and
Yeah.
say,
It's less.
yeah, oh,
Horrifying.
that's a UFO,
Right.
which is an alien thing. That's what that is.
Yep.
But this dude, he saw like some steampunk crazy.
He did, and that is kind of the thing. If you go through some of those old, because there's really some wonderful stuff being written. Obviously, like Keel and Brad Steiger and Rosemary and Ellen Guiley. They all three of them kind of like, I really love their writing style and how they investigated. It's just like, it was kind of a folk approach to the phenomenon, which resonates with me a lot because I'm not that interested in like government cover-ups and stuff. I find that rather boring and dry. That's for somebody else to deal with.
Yeah.
Their approach really was so wonderful because when you read the book, you get such a panoply, such a wide variety of contactee experiences and encounters with just such a different wide array of entities or whatever you want to call them, and then it sort of became homogenized in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, where it was kind of, if it's not a gray alien, then it didn't exist,
Right.
People just decided like, let's just go to one creature now, I wonder how that happened, or if there's validity to any of it. Sorry, but back to Nebraska. So kind of that's one of my favorite flying wing humanoid stories. But then one of the most dramatic Bigfoot accounts was in 1967 when that flap was going on in the Myersville area. There was two sets of teenagers who were like physically accosted by a Bigfoot creature. One, there was two girls driving back into Nebraska City at the time, and they were going down this dirt road it's called Seven Sisters Road, which I'll tell you about later. This is a place that's right by Myersville. It runs kind of adjacent to the Missouri River, and a lot of weird things have happened on this road. And these girls were driving, and they saw like what they thought was a bear in the ditch of the country road. And so they're like, oh my God, a bear. We don't have bear in Nebraska. This is crazy. And as they start driving their car, the thing stands up and it's like, according to them, 8.5 feet tall. And they had now, and this is back in the 60s, so Bigfoot was just coming out. So they actually, I think, used the word Bigfoot, if I'm recalling correctly. And the creature lifted up the back of their car as the tires were spinning. And,
oh no!
Yeah, and they were like screaming, freaking out, and then it let the car back down, and they peeled out and drove off as the thing's just like standing, like moving its arms in the road,
Oh,
and then
man.
in that same area, a couple days later, and there was, I guess, 7 witnesses to this, like 7 kids. They were like, it was like back in the 60s, so like I think it was like 2 cars full of kids were driving down Seven Sisters Road, and this is kind of a popular place, kind of like, I think where kids would go and make out, have beers, smoke cigs.
Yeah, it's a lover's lane.
It was a lover's lane situation, which I wonder. I always kind of wonder, does that attract the phenomenon? And like a, that kind of heightened emotion stuff. Obviously, Keel talked about that quite a bit. But so these 2 cars were down there, being teenagers, and they saw like glowing red eyes in the dark off the side of the road, and they pulled over to see what it is. Then this creature came like rushing at them, took one of the kids supposedly, and threw at one of the kids in the ditch. And then his friends helped him get out of the ditch, and they got in the cars and took off. But like that, they went to the police right after and reported the kid was all scratched up. His like clothes were torn, and he said that Bigfoot threw him in the ditch. And that was in the Nebraska City, like just like regular newspaper. And Nebraska City is not. It's not big, but it's not small. It's probably like, population of 50,000. So it's kind of a major, for Nebraska, that's kind of a big little city. Kind of a big place.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a major story that I in the 60s that came out. But like, it's to me, like, I can't believe that's such a big deal that like nobody here knows about that. When I tell people, like, from Nebraska around, they're like, really? We've had a Bigfoot sighting here? I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, no, people don't know about this stuff. And currently, there's an area in eastern Nebraska, I'll get to that they're having a ton of stuff. But this area of eastern Nebraska, even the 80s, there was this place called Iron Horse Wildlife Management Center, or Wildlife Management Area. And there was a rash in the 80s and 90s of people seeing black cats quite often. To the point of where a group of kind of like country fellas got together and wrote the senator of Nebraska and said, look, we're seeing these black cats around trails where kids are hiking, and we need to do something about it. They wrote this like angry 10-page letter to Senator Exxon of Nebraska that they were so incensed that they weren't doing anything about the black cat that he thought was a threat to the area. And around the same area, and this all around the Myersville area, there was reports in the 60s and a couple in the early 70s of what was described in the newspaper as a 3-foot tall walking raccoon that had like weird like features and glowing red eyes that people would see crossing the road.
Oh no!
Yeah. And that
that's
sounds
one
like
of those. Oh no!
Yeah, it's like in the Ponca tribe, the Native American tribe around here, and I'm not trying to culturally appropriate anything, but they have a history of talking about a small 3-foot creature around that area. So long before these people started seeing this stuff. So. Yeah, and even in the 60s into 70s, people were seeing these lights so much in that area that there was this kind of ritzy area where the hoi polloi of Nebraska City lived called Riverview Drive. And they would go up with picnic baskets and like cold beverages at night in the summer and go watch the lights. And it was just like a normal thing. Like, hey, let's go watch the lights over the Missouri River. But it was so funny because I asked the historian, I go, well, what were they thinking about that? And they honestly just thought it was some kind of natural phenomenon that was here for a little bit. They didn't think it was like, aliens from another planet or anything. But they just kind of like, look, I guess it's just part of the area. We have these weird lights. And so they just became like, it became kind of a normal situation for them, which I kind of love.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's good fun.
And you know what's funny? You said there was a wildlife management area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the TNT area is. It's the McClintock Wildlife Refuge.
Is it really? I didn't know that
management
was a WMA.
area. Yeah.
Oh my lord.
Yeah, that's what it's called. It's only, UFO nuts that call it TNT, people like us.
Yeah.
It's actually the McClintock Wildlife Management Area.
I didn't know that was, I actually did not know that was a WMA. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you're talking about those big cats that I'm like, yep.
And
Yep.
Even to this day along the Republican River, I mean, like we have a ton. Hunting is pretty big here. And so there is wildlife management areas littered throughout the state. And when I talked to there's a couple people who are Bigfoot researchers in the area, and I've talked to all of them, and they say, look, if you want to go find evidence of structures and tracks, go to the wildlife management areas. He's like, they are hanging out there. There's tons of reports from down in these areas. So yeah, it does seem like a good place. Like if you're wanting to like go explore and looking for weird stuff, I feel like a good anywhere you go, a wildlife management area. Yeah, WMA is a pretty good place to start. So yeah, we've had a lot of weirdness around those areas. In fact, I'm gonna just give you another flavor of another kind of weird thing we have. In 1957, there was a man named Charles Wetzel who was a dedicated cat fisherman, and he was doing his usual thing after work. He'd go down to the Platte River and catch some catfish home, take it for dinner, and he was doing his usual thing. And all of a sudden, in the corner of his eye, he sees what he thinks is like a pretty good-sized deer hopping like 6 feet in the air as it's just cruising along. And then so he stands up and gets closer to it, and he sees that it is a kangaroo. And
I was waiting for the kangaroos.
Oh yeah. Oh, we've got
sisters.
We've got upas. In Nebraska. We have got upas.
Oh yeah.
But he saw this thing.
Love kangaroo sightings.
And then a couple other people actually reported corroborating his story who were in the area. So there was like some railroad workers that same day said they saw it. And of course, some intrepid researcher, actually it was Raymond Boeche, did the research to see if there was a circus in town or a carnival.
Because that's always what they say.
Yes.
That's always what the cops say. Always.
Yep. The closest zoo is 3 hours away. And it seems like they would almost be more weird if it was this. I mean, maybe not, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, I don't like, either this guy was making a tall tale and then he convinced some other people to, corroborate his story, or he really saw something very odd, because all three of these men said they saw kangaroos. Like, it's pretty hard to mistake it. Like, he did think it was a deer at first because that's what made sense to him.
Well,
But
yeah,
then,
that's even the part they play in their ecosystem.
Yes.
Is basically our deer are like their kangaroos. They're
Exactly.
interchangeable in the ecosystem.
You're exactly
And their
right.
head looks very similar.
Yes,
if
it
it's
does. It has
They
big
do
ears
kinda-
and it
yeah.
has the skinny nose, big eyes.
Yep, slender face. Yep.
If you don't see the little, feet in the front and the big feet and tail, yeah, you could easily look at one and go, "Oh, that's a deer."
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Then why is it jumping like that?
I mean, I would
Uh-oh.
love to see that. And, it's in the surrounding states like Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa, they've all had this too. And then Wisconsin's
Oh, yeah.
actually had quite a bit. Wisconsin's had
Yes.
more than a few. And so I think if you probably looked hard enough, I bet like, I'm just saying this as a guess, but like at least in the Midwest, there's nearly every surrounding state you can find a record of a kangaroo sighting. And I think that stuff is just good fun. I don't know what it means.
Yeah,
but
I love the whole idea of renegade kangaroos running away from zoos and circus trains. Because have you ever seen a tamed performing kangaroo? No, you have not. Not
No,
really.
Never.
Not really.
believe it was last year that there was a wallaby in Ohio.
Wow.
Yep. But there are wallaby farms here.
But it
There's
was an
two.
actual wallaby that
Yeah,
had
it
escaped.
was a real live
and it
wallaby.
got wildlife rehabilitated. But I'm thinking about the plains, and I'm thinking about Australia, and I'm thinking kangaroos, if they could handle the cold, would probably be pretty comfortable on the Great Plains
Yeah.
and in the Midwest.
There's a lot of
Like-
things
Yeah.
to eat.
Yeah.
There's a
things to
lot to eat. It's similar enough of an ecosystem. There's
Totally.
a decent amount of water.
Totally.
But I don't know if they could handle the cold. So
I
there
mean, I don't
can't
think
be
they
a
live
breeding
anywhere that's cold.
population.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like, and in the article, I honestly, because I don't have the newspaper clipping in front of me, but I can't remember what time of year he saw this thing. But he was fishing outdoors, so I'm going to go ahead and guess it wasn't winter.
Yeah.
There's not much river fishing
Yeah.
in Nebraska in the winter because they're frozen. But
No.
yeah, but kind of also, and so like, so I don't like completely abandon the whole Bigfoot thing, I'll tell a couple more Bigfoot things. So, and this is more current, going on right now. There's two brothers named Derek and Barry Webster, and they're kind of elder statesmen of the Omaha Indian tribe in Macy, Nebraska, which is just about 75 miles straight north of Omaha, right along the Missouri River. And there is, it's reservation land. And it's actually, there's the Omaha Reservation and the Winnebago Reservation. And both tribes have a very long history that they're willing to talk about, actually, because I've called them and had many conversations, and they're super cool. But in their culture, they have a spiritual wood brother that they call the Sea Tonga. Now we would call the Sea Tonga basically is a Bigfoot. It's an 8 foot tall creature that that lurks around the riparian forest up in that area. But what's interesting, they don't see it as a flesh and blood, like missing link ape. They believe it's like a spiritual brother who lives amongst them. And they have, and I have not been up there. It's kind of hard. I'm arranging a trip with them this spring to go. Then I'm going to pay them a little money, make a donation to the tribal council. And then they're going to take me out for an overnight where we get, tents and go try to communicate with these things. But Barry has this approach where he speaks in the native language to them, and has like kind of like when he goes out and says stuff to them out in the tree line, supposedly they appear and they come out. So much so that other like Bigfoot groups have flown him all over the country, and he's kind of like replicated his thing. And I guess it supposedly has worked. But so apparently they have so many Bigfoot sightings that it's regular. I guess they come on the reservation all the time. They look in people's trash. There was one story that Barry told me that's really fun. There was a woman who was complaining that a Bigfoot was like looking in her window, and this is not that long ago, like a couple years ago. And so the tribal police came out and they found I guess supposedly they heard rustling under her house. There was like a little like crawl space under her porch, and they saw like a Sasquatch laying in there, and they were like trying to shoo it out with like flashlights. And I'm like, well, that's amazing. Thank you for telling me that story. And so, but then, and there was like in 2020 there was a flying winged humanoid case that was two ladies were coming back. They were actually driving through the area. They weren't from the Omaha reservation or the Winnebago reservation. I think they were probably driving back to Omaha or something. And they saw this thing flying. They thought it was a UFO at first. They saw like a black mass that was like moving and undulating, flying, that went across their car, and then was like kind of like, you know, hovering above their car. And then they saw it. And they said it was just like they kind of described it as a flying gargoyle. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And then there was another case just like 2 years prior to that in 2018 where a woman saw the same sort of creature just sitting on top of a bank in the downtown area. And I'm like, that's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But, you know, when I talk to Barry, he's like, you know, a lot of times we will see this creature, the sea tonga, come out of a purple mist. And they have this kind of purple mist that will appear in certain areas on the reservation land. And they will see things like little stick figures that like little like 2 foot tall things that look like a bundle of sticks in a humanoid shape running around.
Yeah.
And so it's
stick
really
people.
not just, stick people, which you know, very fey, very kind of like, you know, fairy-like. And
I've got reports of those from the Pacific Northwest and from Wisconsin.
Yeah. I mean, that's good to hear because I actually had not, when he told me about it, I was like, oh, wow. That like, I don't know if I'd heard about anything like that, you know, in the United States, but, yeah. So Barry, what Barry, and it's called his research team is called, it's called res squatching. And it is a thing where you can go out and he will take you, not everyone. He's very strict. He's not doing this for money. Like even before I talked to him, he was like a half-hour screening process. He's like, look, if you come out here, he's like, no dope, no drinking. And I was like, look, okay, that's fine. I'll do my dope and drinking afterwards. But, you know, I will respect your wishes, sir, obviously. But yeah, he is a really cool guy. And I just, you know, from talking to him a lot and then talking to other people about him, I don't think he's like, I'm not sure the upside for him of making this stuff up. He's really not putting his name out there in a way where he's trying to be famous. And I don't know, you know, sometimes you just kind of get a vibe about a person. And the vibe I'm getting from this person is he's genuine. And, you know, he's at least, he believes what he's saying, I think.
Right.
You know, beyond that, I can't tell you like a lot of this stuff, but to me, it's very compelling because he's out there doing the work. Him and his like little team of brothers and cousins are out there and they're really trying to document this thing now. But they were also saying like, if we get like a clear video of this, we don't want to share it. We don't want a bunch of people coming here and harming this thing. You know, they see it as like part of their culture and really it's part of their spiritualism. And it's pretty neat. Yeah. And they even talk about like, you know, he talked to me about, he's like, look, in our culture on a special day every year when we have these ceremonies, a lot of the elders say a deer woman comes. It's a woman who's a woman on top and she has deer legs. And he's like, I've seen this thing. It came when we do our drum circles once a year. We have these like, I guess like 9 different tribes get together and they have like this kind of like week-long thing where they do ceremonies, learn about each other's culture. It's a really beautiful situation. And they have this occurrence from time to time where a deer woman will show up. And they just let her show up and do her thing.
That.
Yeah. Yeah.
I completely believe that. Sacred ceremonies that have been kept up for generations have power.
Yeah.
And respect has power.
Yep.
And if I have always thought about, you know, Bigfoot type creatures in particular, that they have, my personal opinion is they are some form of spirits of wilderness. And if you approach them appropriately and with respect, you have a much higher chance of encountering one than if you just run around in the woods and like yell and bang
Yep.
on trees
Yes.
and try and treat them like an animal.
Yeah.
Because they, a lot of Bigfoot evidence is that these are not stupid animals.
Yes.
These are not just an ape.
Yes.
These are something very important to multiple cultures and something that is a worldwide phenomena. And in pretty much every indigenous community that talks about them, they're talked about respectfully and as something with great power that should be treated well.
Yep.
Or avoided, but either avoidance or treated well,
Yep.
there is an element of deep respect
Yes.
for these beings.
Well, you bring up such an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, and that's actually I'm glad you mentioned that because I kind of forgot to say that is Barry and Derek's approach up in rescue watching, where it's like their two rules are no dogs, no guns.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was telling me, he kind of said like we use the golden rule approach, and that's what I was like. I'm like, oh, that's so
Yes.
smart. He's like, we approach them like we would like to be approached. If like
Yes.
he's like, if you just think about it, if I was a creature living in amongst the forest as a spirit creature, if someone's coming bang on trees with like an AR-17 and they're being all broy and chest puffed, like tough guys. Well, hard pass. I'm not going to come out and interact with that. So
Yeah.
That's absolutely the case.
yeah.
Any self-respecting spirit would, run away from that.
Yeah.
Ain't
Or
nobody
teach
want
you
that.
a lesson.
Yeah, or teach you.
Also true.
You're exactly right. Exactly. And I'd rather not be taught a lesson.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah,
like
that's-
like a peaceful interaction. I would like to high five, and like just let's
Yeah.
learn about each other, man.
Right.
Yeah.
You know-
And I'm very cautious with the paranormal because I've experienced it a lot, but my base way of coping with it is with respect because it's bigger than me.
Yes.
And it is an unknown quantity,
Right.
and it's clearly very important and powerful. And what do you do when you encounter something unknown that's important and powerful and shows up in every culture on the planet?
Yeah.
You treat it with respect
Yes.
and dignity. And, I also think backing up and going away from it is a form of respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you're in a place and some stuff's happening, be it UFOs or Bigfoot or whatever, and you get the feeling that it doesn't want you there, then just like you would respect a cougar's personal space,
Yep.
or a bear's personal space, or a deer or whatever, respect the UFO's personal space.
I
Yeah.
agree. And you may actually get more out of that.
Yes.
You may glean because if you're leaving in fear has this an actual physical effect on the body where it can make memories become less clear and because so much adrenaline. But if if you back off with respect, you may glean more about the encounter or not, but at least going with hey, I respected this thing, man. You gave me a little bit of yourself and I got to experience it and thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that approach.
I was gonna point out there's a book by David Paulides that is not Missing 411. It's called The Hoopa Project. I'm pretty sure that's the name of it. If it's another one of his books that it's a different name, I'll put it in the show notes. But he goes around to the Native American tribes of the Pacific Northwest and California, and some in the desert Southwest. And he has a friend with him who is Native American himself, and he is a police sketch artist.
Oh.
And he goes and he talks with the witnesses, and then they describe what they saw and interacted with very detailed to this artist. If you look at those pictures, it doesn't look like an animal at all. It looks like a hairy man.
Yeah.
There's like one or two features that makes it a little less man-like. Like their neck is short, but it may not actually be short. It may just be so muscle bound up through here that it makes the neck appear short. And then sometimes there's a little bit of the point to the back of the head, like a sagittal crest.
Right.
But mostly they look human.
Well,
And that to me tells me that, maybe there is a spirit brother
Yes.
to humans.
Yes.
I think
Ooh.
that it's sort of like, orangutan means forest man.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's what orangutan means.
Really?
Is forest human, basically, or man of the forest. And if I've gotten to see an orangutan very close in a zoo once, and the eyes are not the eyes of something without intelligence.
Right.
Anytime I have seen a great ape, they have not looked like something that wasn't kin. They look like kin. And in my brain and in my heart, I feel like they are cousins. And they are genetically like our near relations, but maybe it's just because humans are wired to recognize the similar facial features and the similar facial structures and everything. But they do seem to be kinfolk. And I know that's like super fluffy and woo-woo.
No,
but
I hear
not
you.
really.
Yeah.
I feel like when you look at animals, they're also a form of kin. But I think I'm pretty sure Bigfoot is something that if we're not related to it and it's not related to us, like if it's not the missing link, which I am very up in the air about, is it a
Right.
missing link? I
Right.
think it's spiritual, more spiritual than material.
Yeah.
But it is still kin of some form, and we all just seem to have forgotten that the animals that we share this planet with are in some way, shape, or form related to us.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to kind of be more compelled by that notion as well. And I mean, I sort of would like take it maybe like a step further and say like whatever the UFO pilots are, or the hundreds of different things that, a guy like John Keel writes about in terms of like entities and stuff, they may just all be sort of related to us and share this earth and realm with us, like they may be closer to us than we think, or they may be part of us, like it's like, I have a hard time, like most of my life was spent thinking these are foreign entities that are completely separate from earth, and they're coming here and interacting in our time and space. But I don't have that feeling so much anymore. You know what I mean? like,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I've decided on that. In 2 years, I may go back to my old way of thinking. But, like right now, the idea is that, like in Joshua Cushin and Timothy Renner's wonderful 2 volumes, Where the Footprints End, I think they present a pretty compelling case for, what we know to be as Bigfoot or Sasquatch, that it is material and non-material, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think put that in the paranormal court of law, and I think it holds water. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to also point out that I've had this weird idea, and it's been around in my head for a while, that what if some of these beings are simply half of our soul that is not material at this time, right? So that they can become material for short periods of time, but they're not all the time.
Right.
But they're there, and they seem to have to interact with us. I mean, yeah, sure. I've seen weird things happening in the woods, and I've looked at it and, gone, and they didn't come out and interact with me.
Right.
They weren't interacting with me. I was spying on them.
Yeah.
And that's usually not a good thing to do, so I try not to do it anymore. But it's still the case that there seems to be a great desire to communicate with us. And if they were from some realm entirely other than ours,
Right.
why do they need to talk to us so bad? You know, why communicate? And then when they communicate, it isn't anything like, hey, bro, we're from Arcturus, man.
Yeah.
And we want you to join the Galactic Federation. The only people who get that are like contactees, and usually they end up like messed up by this phenomena messing with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you don't get the Star Trek thing. You get, hey, you're tearing up your planet. Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yep.
What's this nuclear energy thing? I don't like it.
Yeah.
Can we not?
Yeah.
You know, it's
Well,
like,
you know,
it's something that has to do with this earth.
Yeah. See,
And-
I agree. I so agree.
And it's trying to get little brother over here to chill out with the, industrial revolution shit.
Absolutely.
And to stop that.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely. I mean, look,
believe in something.
yeah.
Don't tear it all up.
Yeah. Look. Yeah. This place is so special and precious. Yeah. I mean,
And it's all we got.
it's all we got.
Yep.
I mean, like, yeah. I know. People are like, well, no, we'll go to Mars and terraform that. I'm like, I don't know. Why
Do
don't
you
we
know
just,
how hard that is?
And also, why don't we just try to fix this place? It is fixable.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
And it's our home.
it's our home, man. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
And
even
it's
if
our,
even
it's
if
the
we
home
do
of all
join
of
the
our
Federation.
animals and our trees, and
Yeah.
every
We're
other
still-
living thing on
it's
this
still
planet.
gonna be our home.
Humans,
Absolutely.
we have the ability to just destroy this.
Yes.
But with the ability to destroy, also comes the ability to not destroy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a choice.
Like destruction is a choice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, the obliteration of the Earth is a choice. I mean, like, there are practical, real solutions out there that we could, as a planet and species, all come together and say, look, we're going to make some sacrifices. Maybe we can't eat steaks all the time. Maybe we all can't, fly in airplanes, 10 times a year. Maybe there should be limits on that stuff. And I'm okay living a restricted lifestyle if it means to help save the future of
Everybody
the human
else.
race. I mean, like,
Same.
but until we all agree upon that, or the controllers of, people who control
Society.
our economic system, agree upon that, then it won't happen. Sadly, the three of us can be in the same mindset and go, hey, we'll do this. We'll make these sacrifices, but it won't make a difference. Like, I like to think that me recycling my bottles and cans every week is helping out, but it's really not. We need systemic
it's not
change.
helping that much.
Yeah.
You know what will help if you plant a tree or a garden, though.
I do. I'm
Yeah,
an
that
avid
does help.
I'm an avid gardener. And
There we
Yeah.
go.
I'll tell you what, I can't tell you how many times I've listened to this program while gardening. It pairs so well with gardening. Highly recommend trying
Good
that
to
stuff
know.
out
Happy.
there. Yeah.
As a fond gardener myself, that makes me happy.
Yeah.
It makes me happy too.
Nothing better than getting your fingers in the dirt. I swear, it is the greatest therapy on earth.
It's
Truthfully,
something
it
we're
is.
designed to do.
Yeah.
There's a bacterium that can sink into your hands from soil that helps with serotonin.
Yep.
They
Well,
found that out last year.
Yeah,
I was
and-
like, really?
Well, yeah, and
So I'm not crazy.
Well, the whole grounding, the whole concept of grounding, like putting your bare feet on grass like multiple times a day, that was considered like, new agey, nonsense for many years. And now there is like this study by the UCLA Medical College coming out and saying, like, not only is it really good for you, like in lowering cortisol levels, increasing serotonin, but they're also finding that it is like reducing the size of tumors and helping like cancer, people with like blood cancers actually minimize the effects of, so like there is now proof scientifically, that, being around the earth and touching the earth and spending as much time as you can outside is incredibly beneficial, not only mentally, but physically.
I
Yeah.
love that it has taken us such a short period of time to forget that,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
because if you go back right before the Industrial Revolution, people knew that.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And then we I think to an extent when we had, the Enlightenment, we threw out some stuff that we should have kept.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a lot of it. Like we threw out a lot of bathwater and didn't keep, and there was a very small baby in there.
Right.
But we did miss the tiny baby, and
Yes.
I think spirituality and what sounds woo-woo sometimes has some good sense to
Yeah.
it. Not all of it does,
Yeah.
and you need to be circumspect about it.
Oh, I agree.
But, I feel like everybody knew at a certain point that being outside is good for you.
Yeah.
And it's only been in the last couple hundred years that we've been like, oh, well, we don't have time to go outside, so we won't. And then we wonder why we're so stressed.
Yeah, exactly.
We're doing things, our technology has allowed us to do things that human brains were not designed to
Yeah.
be able to understand.
Yeah. Well, the technology is in a scary place right now because so much of the technology that's new and cutting edge, and especially in the consumer format, is avoiding going outside. It's
Yeah.
designed to bring everything to you: your entertainment, your food, your friends. I mean, in like obviously during a pandemic, what a wonderful thing. That was such a nice way. But it's not really, I think, a good long-term way for us to be living.
No.
And I've even
No.
I've even noticed suffering in my own social abilities. I have social anxiety, now for the first time in my life, and that is so foreign to me. I never thought, not in a crippling way. I still can go out and see friends, but I get a little nervous before I walk into meet friends for dinner or go to a bar. I'm like, oh boy, there's a lot of people in there, but I do feel myself getting happier the more I'm out and about, going to a bookstore as opposed to ordering a book and having it sent to me. There's something about even a small journey of going to even pick up food or going to pick up a book or, I even miss renting movies because the experience of watching a film. Look, I went out and got it. I looked at a bunch of different, options. I chose it. I put it in my hand. I brought it home. I physically put it into a DVD player, or VCR. I find that now entertainment is brought to us so easy that I don't have the appreciation I do for it anymore. So I'm sorry. I think I didn't mean to get us so.
I pulled a hard left turn there.
Well, it all relates, though.
It's okay.
It all relates. It does relate, though.
I was gonna say we can bring it back to Nebraska real easy. I got a person.
Yeah.
The only weird Nebraska stuff I knew about was Herbert Schirmer.
Well, thank you for that lovely segue because I would love to talk about Nebraska UFOs. And we'll start with
there
Herbert
we
Schirmer,
go.
That is probably our beacon on the hill, shining biggest mainstream UFO account we have, and it's a pretty big one. So in 1967, there was a police officer who I believe was 22 at the time named Herbert Schirmer. And he was a guy who fought in the war, and he was a pretty respected dude in the town. He was just a young cop doing his job, and he was on his nightly rounds, and I believe around, gosh, I'm so bad with dates and times, but I think it was 2 a.m. He was going by the filling station, making sure everything was okay there, and then he was on his way back, and right at the junction of it, they changed the numbers of it, but it used to be the junction of 6 and 66. So at the junction of 666, he sees this kind of football, if you turned a football on its side, it was a metal, gunmetal craft that had fire emanating out of the bottom, and he was like, what? At first he thought it was when he saw it, he just kind of saw the lights and the fire, and he's like, oh, it's an overturned semi, or a semi is having problems. So he gets closer to it, learns quickly it's not a semi, and so he sees this thing, and then he freaks out. It takes off, and he zips back to the station. Immediately tells the sheriff and the other police officers, fills out a report. He's chain smoking. He's totally what did I just experience? And you can even see in the police story, he's like, I saw a UFO tonight, believe it or not. And that was the end of his report. Yeah. And I actually saw the original report, not to brag, but I'm a huge nerd. But he goes back, and then he has these, well, actually, first what happens is, so he has this, it comes out in the newspaper, Offutt Air Force Base, which at the time was one of the biggest, like, behind NORAD, it was like the second biggest, like, nuclear missile strategic air command place. And so it was a real big, it still is a big deal, but at the time it was a huge deal. They came out and checked it out, investigated it. They found like a tiny piece of metal, but then no one knows what happened to that metal. I'm sure they took it. And but what happened was kind of sad. The whole town pretty fast just turned on this man. And the local pastor of the church was like, he is demonic. He is the spawn of Satan. They went so far as to children were making effigies of him and lighting him on fire, taking shots at it. There was like, the people were like spray paint or like, drawing on like the police station, like Satan cop, they thought it was all like devil demonic related. And this poor man was like such a heretic in his own town that he ended up moving out of Ashland, quitting the police force, changing his name. And he only popped up one time in the 70s to talk about this stuff. But for the rest of his life, he lived in total obscurity. Didn't talk about this stuff, became super religious. And to kind of go back, so that's just kind of like the surface story. After this happened, Leo Sprinkle contacted him and he drove down and went to meet with Herbert. And so, and look, I'm not the biggest hypnotic regression person in the world, but I do like Leo Sprinkle. But Leo Sprinkle did hypnotically regress him, and he had when he recovered a bunch of, what Herbert claimed to be a very, intense abduction experience, where in his memory, when he pulled up, that was recovered, when he pulled up to the UFO, a entity walked off that had like kind of like a spacesuit on with a serpentine emblem on his chest, which you've seen in other UFO reports, which I found very interesting. That kind of you've seen, UFO-nauts with kind of like a dragon or reptilian or a this happened to be like a serpentine like patch on his like silver outfit, and he showed him all like and he kind of had these like stories about, kind of like, you guys need to take better care of Earth. And he showed him how the propulsion worked and showed him all the gadgets and stuff. And Herbert drew all these wonderful pictures, very intricate, very detailed, with a lot of physics and science about how the craft worked. And I'm like, this is a 22-year-old cop who never went to college. I'm not even sure he graduated from high school. And he's like laying all this stuff out. It's quite impressive. So much so that like when the Condon Committee was doing their thing in Colorado, they actually brought Herbert to testify up in Colorado. And then shortly after that, he's like, I don't want any part of this. This has like ruined my life. I'm not trying to get famous. I'm not going to write a book. I'm just going to disappear. But 2 years ago, I was lucky enough. It's kind of ironic. The town of Ashland, Nebraska, where this happened, they were so horrible to him. Almost like as horrible as I've ever heard. Obviously Whitley Strieber was treated terribly, but like they really treated this poor man awful. Whether this thing happened or not, they shouldn't have done this.
No.
Yeah, right?
No.
Well, so 2 years ago, the town of Ashland was having, every summer, they have like Ashland Days, where it's kind of like, they have a carnival and like, hay rides and all that junk and cotton candy. But the theme this year was UFOs and the Herbert Schirmer case. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh, geez. Now they're like,
that's tacky.
It's kind of tacky, but I'm like, well, I have to go down and check it out, simply because I had heard that his two surviving brothers were going to be there. And I was like, oh, well, this is fantastic. So I went down. 9 people show up for their lecture. And then like half of them were asleep. I'm not even joking. And these 2 old men kind of corroborated everything that Herbert claimed that he saw. Then afterwards, they did a really abbreviated talk because honestly, like no one cared except for me. It was kind of sad. It kind of bummed me out. But because they were there and bored, I went up and just said, "Hey, do you mind if I like talk to you guys?" And they were totally cool. They were really excited to talk to like this enthusiastic large Nebraska kid. And I talked to him for about an hour. And the thing that they told me that was kind of revelatory to me is that when Herbert and the older brother were kids, their father was working, I think, around White Sands, New Mexico, or they were driving around. He was a military guy, and they were driving with the family around White Sands, Mexico, and they said they saw a landed silver disc. The whole family did, Herbert included. And that was never mentioned in any of the literature I'd ever read about Herbert. So I was like, ooh, I got a little scoop of a story, because like, I know, and probably, they probably knew that, but back in those days, and even now, like a MUFON or a NICAP, they did not want repeat experiencers.
Oh,
They
no.
thought that would, like, you know, deflate the story. But to me, that's like a huge part of the story that I never knew, is that, look, his whole family had an experience with a silver saucer back in like the early 50s. I'm like, that's pretty major, man. Like,
yeah.
So
and that's what Keel meant by, you know, ask about their family.
Absolutely.
Because there's always something weird.
There is. And I was not expecting to, you know, get to talk to these guys, you know, very much at all. And they were so happy to talk to somebody who believed. And they told me, like, they're like, look, like, while this is kind of like a big, you know, it's kind of neat that they were like, it's very cool that Herbert's being remembered in a positive way today. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. They're like, but overall, he never wished this happened to him. It had an impact. And he's like, he was really open about talking about it with us. But when he did, he got really emotional. And he became a very religious man afterwards. Like, he kind of found his solace in the church. And it disrupted his life, and it really was not a great thing for him. The experience itself was not negative, but it was everyone's reaction to him, which kind of took a toll on the poor man. So that's kind of one of my favorites. And then I'll kind of go rewind back in time, because it's an Omaha case, and I'm from Omaha. And so in the late 1800s, when all the flying airship flaps were happening, Nebraska was at the forefront. We have as many as anywhere, really, and that's just around Hastings, Nebraska. There was tons of sightings. Lincoln, and this went on for multiple years, and you know, they were happening all over the country, really. And I know the Bay Area had a ton, but Kansas, Illinois had a ton, and Nebraska had a lot that are documented in newspapers. And the one that, like, always, like, because it's a local case, is that in 1897 in Omaha, Nebraska, which it was always kind of a rich, thriving town, because it was a river city that had a lot of cattle, and Union Pacific was kind of like one of the places that first started, was in Omaha. So it was kind of a thriving town. A lot of people from New York moved here for work and, you know, to the American dream. And in 1897, they had already experienced the flying airships. So this wasn't a new phenomenon, but one came down very low, and it looked like a big cigar-shaped craft with, like, you know, these like headlights that were shining all around, and it hovered above downtown Omaha, and 500 people witnessed this. And this is an article that the Nebraska Historical Society, I've actually talked to somebody from the Historical Society to kind of corroborate what they knew. And they're like, oh yeah, we have the same stuff and we have more. So she actually sent me a bunch of articles that were written back then about it. And supposedly on top, there was men, like 4-foot tall men with beards on top of the metal cigar, waving at people. From the downtown. They were just waving like, hey, folks of Omaha, how are ya? We're here to weird you out. So, yeah, you know, and there was definitely, like, around Nebraska, there was definitely kind of like contact with some of these people in the flying airships. A lot of times they were saying, like, hey, we're going to Brazil tomorrow. Do you know what time it is there? And they would ask really weird questions. You know, they're like, how many gallons of water are in that lake? You know, they would ask, like, so many, like, kind of inane, weird, like, almost Men in Black type questions that they didn't really... They looked humanish, but didn't behave quite humanish, you know, like, So, yeah, you know, that is, it's also, I mean, I don't know why it, like, drives me crazy that people don't know or care around here about that. I'm like, guys, we had a mass sighting here. No one cares. But, you know,
it is
we're
so
lonely
odd.
in these topics, guys. It's a lonely world reading to this stuff, isn't it? It can be.
Yeah.
But not when you meet new buddies like you guys. So.
True.
But another case, and I'm just jumping around here. So another Omaha-ish case, another kind of famous one is in 1975, there was a car full of, I think, you know, kids in their 20s, and they were driving back from Council Bluffs, Iowa. Really, where I live in Omaha, you could, like, throw a softball over the river, and it's Iowa. Like, I can be in Iowa in 8 minutes from where I live. So
Right.
we're right on the border. Council Bluffs is kind of considered Omaha almost. But in Council Bluffs, right across the river from Omaha, this car full of people saw a disc-shaped craft that was glowing red, and it was like wobbling, hovering above this place called Big Lake Park. And another car full of people saw the same thing. So they called Eppley Airfield, which is our local airport. They called the police, and they came down, and they found on this levee going down in the park all this molten slag that was like, it looked like fresh lava that had come out of a volcano, was dripping all over this levee. And so they took samples of it, and then Jacques Vallée loves this case. In fact, one of the two pieces of metamaterial that him and Gary Nolan are currently working on at Stanford is this slag that was taken from this park. Not to brag, just kidding. But
you're allowed to have hometown pride, man.
Thank you.
Totally.
I'm just so proud of it. But yeah, so it's a really interesting case, and Vallée came down and did some research on it. So he's like, all right, the first thing we have to figure out is where in Nebraska, what's the closest place in Nebraska that can melt steel to that point? And it was like 300 miles away. And then he's like, okay, so if let's say this factory in like western Nebraska melted this steel, then had to transport it and then drop it from the air. And he's like, I don't know what can do that, So he kind of like was able to like throw out the notion that it was a hoax. Also, I mean, like that's a pretty extravagant hoax. I don't think teenagers could do that.
Yeah, you require technology and funding, and a lot of people to figure that one out.
Fast transportation,
right? And who are they doing it for? 2 carfuls of people? I mean, like that's not a very like meaningful hoax if you're doing it that way,
Yeah.
But that is a really fun case, and again, like we have a very good local historical society, and they're not afraid to write about this stuff, and they have multiple written beautiful pieces about documenting this particular case. And it's just a fun one because like it's actually still being studied today, even though it's like almost 50 years later, this case is kind of still in play because it's one of the few compounds that Jacques has. Like, this is truly crazy. There's no way we could fold the pieces of metal like that. And, they're pretty confounded with how this was constructed. They're like, we just don't know how they would do that on Earth. The elements aren't weird, but it's the way they're compounded. So,
and the isotopes.
Yeah, and the isotopes.
They have different numbers of electrons.
Exactly.
That's
every time I hear about metamaterial, all I can think about is the dwarven smiths in Norse mythology.
I know about those. Yes. You're not wrong. I never thought about that.
That's all I can think is all of the mythical smiths that made amazing weapons or amazing tools with magical properties. And that's all I can think is magical weapons made by gods or fairies or dwarves.
Morgana, that's such a great, interesting analysis, because if you think about, I know Vallée, I think in the Trinity book, thought about, what if, UFOs are, a 3D printer, and they just print them on demand? You want a saucer? Well, we'll instantly print a saucer using the elements around Earth. But, that almost makes sense. Maybe the slag is the excrement from the 3D printing of the craft they saw. It's the leftover material that they didn't need. So, I never thought about it like that. That's really interesting.
Leftover material, it could be, honestly, the craft might have just dissolved because its purpose was done.
Yep. Yes.
And fairy gold that evaporates back into leaves in the morning.
It just disappears.
Yeah, and don't tulpas, once their use is done, in the Vedic tradition, don't they disappear? I think they do kind of just disintegrate. Once the use of the tulpa.
Yeah, if you created it, you're supposed to dissipate it as well.
Right.
It's kind of on you to do that.
Right.
But sometimes they kind of go off on their own, and the tulpa that was created by someone becomes a cloak for another being to wear, and it goes and it creates trouble, and that's why you're supposed to, take out the trash after you're done playing with the tulpa.
Well, it's
you
like
know,
it's
you
like
can't be
banishing.
just letting it. Yes, you can't be just letting it hang out. You know, because it's going to do something.
Yeah, you can't do the Babylon
yeah,
working and then not send it back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. That's.
Yeah, I remember. I have a friend who, well, I haven't talked to him for years, but he was like, into kind of like thelemic magic and stuff. He's like, dude, he was like, dude, you gotta learn banishing first, man. I'm like, sounds good, Seth. You got it.
Yes.
First two things you should learn are how to put a circle up so things can't eat your face, and how to get rid of the thing that wants to eat your face.
It's true. Yeah. He used to always tell me, he's like, man, you're into all this UFO stuff. He's like, bro, you should really learn banishing, man, because like that stuff will follow you. And at the time, I was like, oh, whatever. And now I'm kind of like, I think he was right. I probably should.
No, seriously. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He was
onto
correct.
something. He was onto
If you
something.
remember, in a couple of Keel's books, he says the only people who knew what was going on were the occultists, witches, and magicians.
Yeah.
Because they were like, oh, no, we know about these.
Yes, absolutely.
But
No,
y'all
man.
don't listen to us.
Yeah. Look, I just started reading a Kenneth Grant book yesterday, Beyond the Mob Zone. I'm a huge Twin Peaks guy, and I know a lot of Twin Peaks lore and the mythology of it is kind of like influenced by a lot of Kenneth Grant stuff. So I'm reading that, but he is an interesting writer. I've never read any of his stuff. I've only read about him, but I've never read his stuff, and I'm quite enjoying Beyond the Mob Zone. It's crazy.
Yeah, he's a good writer.
He is.
He has a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. So let me think. Like I there's a couple other modern things I want to tell you about, but I guess I'll mention one. We got a contactee, a kind of a he's I don't think he's super well known, but his name is John Foster, and he has had, according to him, like thousands of contact experiences and like all over the place. One time, even like I guess the first contact experience he had, he was like 9 years old, and him and his friend were like circled by a group of bullies, and a saucer came down, and little 3 foot tall, like gray looking, humanoids came in and took care of the bullies for him, which I thought, what a wonderful little after school special that would have been.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite like stories he tells about his contact experience is that in the state of Nebraska football, which used to be very good, we have no pro sports here, so it's kind of like a religion here. People are very serious about Nebraska football. So we have a huge big stadium with like 80,000 people, and he said him and his wife were at a Nebraska football game, and that all of a sudden this fog rolled in on the field, and that they stopped playing the football game, and that a huge mothership hovered above the stadium, and everyone was looking up. The player stopped, the referee looked up, and everyone's like looking at this big thing. And then all of a sudden the fog starts dissipating, and the craft like takes off, and everyone goes back to normal, like they didn't see anything. And only him and his wife were like, wait, what? Like, so I thought
wow.
that's a very troubling story to me for some reason, psychologically.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I take most of the contactee stuff with a grain of salt. They're just kind of fun anecdotes and stories, and so I thought I'd mention that.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
The whole idea of this mystical fog coming,
right?
And then there's the UFO. Everybody's looking at it, and then the fog dissipates, there's nothing there, and everybody's like, oh, we're gonna play football now.
Exactly.
It's like,
blow the whistle, back to the game. Yeah.
But
I wonder if there was anybody else in the crowd who saw it and remembered it, and
That's a
just
great
has been
question.
wandering around by themselves.
being like, I ain't gonna tell nobody.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell, man?
Honestly,
I ain't gonna say nothing.
Yeah, and if
Somebody
I saw
who had a flask on him, had a flask he'd been drinking all through the game, and then he just threw that flask away. And
He's
went
like, this
home
stuff doesn't
and
work
never
anymore.
talked to anybody again.
That's
it's
the
like,
day I quit
nope,
drinking.
I'm done.
But I mean, like,
no.
it's always, I always find that so funny when people are like, man, he saw a UFO. What was he smoking? Like, look, I've smoked a little bit of grass in my time, and I have never seen anything like a UFO because I smoked weed.
Yeah.
It's such a crazy notion.
Yeah. I know.
People,
I know.
understand your drugs better. Gosh. But so that is, I could talk about him for 2 hours, but it's a lot of really weird like UFO stuff. And I want to give you more of a overview. So a couple of things I'm sort of personally working on. About a year and a half ago, I was just like, it was during the pandemic. My line of work, the whole showbiz thing was really like totally shut down during the pandemic. They were hardly shooting anything. So I kind of felt like I had this like sabbatical. So I really like made it my 9 to 5 job into like researching Nebraska stuff. So anyways, I was
That's cool.
Yeah, it was really some of the greatest months of my life, to be honest. It was like what I always wanted to do, to play John Keel, So I found this, gosh, I can't remember what website or forum it was, but I found this guy who was a bow hunter, and he had described this very dramatic Bigfoot experience about an hour away from where I live in this tiny little village called Douglas, Nebraska, which is literally a village of 68 people. It's in the middle of the cornfields. Just your cell phone doesn't even work out there because I've been out there. But so I heard about the story and I was like, oh my God. A lot of the stuff he was saying, it was around a lot of places where people experienced a lot of things. So I was like, he sounds really scared, and he wasn't using his real name, and it didn't seem like he wanted anything out of this. So I was able to kind of do some internet sleuthing and find his contact information. And I wrote him an email. Didn't hear anything back. I wrote him another one, didn't hear anything back. And finally, the third email, he wrote back. He's like, I'm willing to have a phone conversation with you, but I won't take you out there. And I'm like, fair enough. And so we hop on the phone, and he tells me this very dramatic story of where he was going to check his salt licks. He's a big bow hunter for deer, and so he was on this farmer's property. It's like a family friend, and this farmer owns all the farm property around this area. For as far as the eye can see, this one farmer owns all of it. And it's just big, tall. It's either soybean fields or it is tall, very tall corn stalks. And he went out there to check his salt licks, and he was like, pulling his car up, and he was like, grabbing a big salt lick to go set out for the deer so he could track the deer, putting up some trail cams. And I didn't know any of this. I'm not a hunter. I didn't know how much work deer hunters do before they actually go hunt. It's like a year-round thing, and a lot of it's mostly just tracking, setting up, salt things, blah blah blah. So he was pulling his truck up, and he sees this above this bush. He showed me I'll get to that, but he's above this bush, a face of a giant. It was a black hair, conical shaped head with 2 eyes, and he said he drove up, got out of his car, looked at this thing, and he's like, I literally did the thing where I was rubbing my eyes because I was sure I was seeing things. He's like, I just got off work, I was really tired, so I was sure I was seeing things. But then the thing stands up, and it's gigantic, and he says he almost has. He's like, I literally almost had a heart attack. I thought I was having a heart attack. He's like, because I was seeing something that should not be there, and the man was absolutely freaked out, peeled out in this thing, and he could see the thing. He looked at it. Looked back a couple times to make sure he was seeing what he was seeing, and sure enough, he kept on seeing it. And so that happened, and he was so traumatized, he stopped bow hunting. He wouldn't go to that area. In fact, he just didn't hunt for 2 years, and he had been hunting since he was 4 years old with his grandfather. It was like a way of life. It's how he kept meat in his freezer, and he just stopped doing it.
Yeah.
He was like, I can't. It ruined hunting for me. And he was super depressed about it. So I talked to him, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Sean. His name's Sean, and now he doesn't mind if I use his name. His name's Sean Wilson, and I kind of convinced him. I go, look, can you just tell me where this is? Can you give me coordinates, drop a pin? Because I do want to go check it out. And, I go, I am not asking you to do it. And he goes, it's so hard to find. You'll never find it. And he's like, screw it. He's like, meet me at this park, at 9 a.m. on Sunday, and I will drive you to the area, and then I'm leaving. And he's like, if you have a gun, I highly recommend bringing one, or I'll let you borrow one of mine. I'm like, oh, I'm okay. I don't need it. I'm not a gun guy. So all good, brother. And so I meet him out there, and he's no nonsense. There wasn't and I'm like, hey, how you doing? And I'm kind of a very outgoing, try to be a sweetheart, and I brought him a coffee. I'm like, hey, Sean, I brought you a coffee and a pastry. He's like, no, thanks. All right, follow me. And it was no nonsense, at all. He wanted to get this over with. So he took me out to the property, and at first, he was just going to show me where he saw the creature. But then he takes me back into this kind of forest part where he has a bunch of his trail cams and shows me these structures that, you guys, I'm not joking, they were so impressive. I could not believe it.
Wow.
There was gigantic big tree logs X'd up way up high in these oak trees. All kinds of like weird things that definitely, I'm obviously I'm not an arborist. I don't know a ton about nature, just, kind of a average level, but like I have no idea how this stuff was put together unless he had like a tractor or weights and pulleys doing it just for me. Because this is not like something you could see from the road. You had to like hike in about a half a mile to see this stuff. And I'm not joking, like it was so mind-blowing to where I was actually like really scared because I was like, oh, I'm sure we're going to see this creature now. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm prepared for this. But he came out there. He was fully armed. He had 2 like 9mm pistols, one in his shoulder, one in his hip. And he showed me this stuff. And you could tell he was real nervous too. And I was like, okay, so we did that for about a half hour. And he's like, look, you can stick around, but I'm getting out of here because, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm like, fair enough. And I stuck around there for about 5 minutes. Made a cute little video on my phone, and I was like, I'm kind of scared. I got the creeps in such a major way. And I was like, my cell phone doesn't work out here. No one could hear me scream. Like, I mean, I felt too alone.
Only one man knows where you are, and he's gone.
And he's gone. Yep. He's not coming back, man. And that's what he said. So I left, and then we've continued to talk, though. And he has had another encounter, and he actually sent a picture to me of what he thinks is a Bigfoot head in these trees. And when he circles it on like the little picture he sends to me, it's like, it does look like the face of like what you would think a Bigfoot looks like. I'll send you guys the picture if you want to see it. It's like, it's not like mind blowing, like, case closed, there it is. But like, you can see what he's talking about. And, and he also has a trail cam video of like what looks like a hairy arm covering the top half of the trail cam video. But this guy continually says he gets whooped at and he gets like things thrown at him. And now he's not scared. He says he actually shot a deer and left it for whatever the creature that he says it was. Yeah. And he said, since I did that, there's been no more like violent behavior. He's like, I'll hear whoops and stuff, but it feels, he's like, it feels different. He's like, the whole vibe of the place is different now. Now I'm not scared to go hunting. He's like, I feel like I just had to leave an offering. But he's having ongoing stuff, like, he's like, I'm not going out there right now because the roads are too bad. Because it's like, he's like, but, in a month or so, if the roads clear up, him and I are going to go out again. And he's going to take me out early in the morning. He's like, we'll meet here at 4 a.m. He's like, they're super active around like between 4 and 5 in the morning. So I'm going to go out with him, and I'll tell you, I am nervous because like as much as I want to experience the thing, I'd be lying if I said I'm not a little scared, but I definitely am taking him up on that. I have to. So that's been fun. And I'm really trying to
you have my phone number too. So if you see some shit, you got to call me.
I'll need to talk to somebody.
I figure.
I will call you, I swear. You're my paranormal therapist.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. And so that there's more to that, but like I could really talk about that all day because I'm trying to take a little page out of the valet book, and I want to try to follow this guy throughout his lifetime to see how this affects him. Yeah, because it has affected him. He's like he's actually thinking about not eating meat anymore and just becoming like a hunter who kills the thing and then gives the meat away. He's like it's kind of changed my perspective. And he's now, at first he thought it was just like a weird ape, and now he thinks it's something spiritual. And he has a bunch of footprints too that he's found in the cornfields and stuff. I'm like, I don't know how these footprints would appear in a cornfield. Obviously, unless he's hoaxing me, which he could be. Maybe he's going to all this trouble to hoax one person from Omaha, Nebraska. To me, that seems unlikely. I mean, he's got four kids and a full-time job, so.
Yeah, that's not it. That whole vegetarian thing, that happens all over the paranormal.
It does.
People turn vegetarian. So many contactees.
Yep.
So many people who see the Blessed Virgin.
Yeah.
I was about to say Saint Cecilia or Saint Catherine of Siena. Like so many saints.
Yeah.
Particularly female
after
saints.
They see light
become vegetarians or restricted their eating down to just the Eucharist, like Catherine of Siena. But It's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is.
that is so not surprising at all.
Yeah. And this, I mean, this
Honestly,
is yeah,
weirdly, I have been wanting to eat less meat myself,
yeah.
which is weird because
Yep.
I'm very carnivorous. I mean, I
Yeah.
grew up on a farm,
Right.
you know, so
Right.
but recently I've been eating more beans and rice than
Yep.
anything.
Yeah,
So I don't
and
know. I
it's
don't know
co-
what's going on.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
I've spent kind of like, I'm one of those people. I'll do 3 years being a vegetarian, 18 months of eating meat, 3 years of being. I'm all over the place. That's just kind of the story of who I am. I'm a very, I crave novelty, so I'll do something for a while, then I'll change it up, and it's just odd.
Yeah,
but
That's fair.
It is. It just makes life more interesting to me, I suppose. But and then I'll kind of just, I know we've been on for an hour and a half, so I don't want to talk too much, but
How about you give us one last your favorite case?
well, my favorite case honestly might have been that one I mentioned, that flying humanoid one with like the computer
That's
dials
fair.
on its
With the
chest.
eyes.
I love that because
Yeah,
it's
and
so
dove
high
hands.
strange. Yeah, it's got all the kind of like the recipes for like a great, mind-blowing, weird, like, if I try to think of like what's the weirdest thing I could see, like that's about as weird as I can think of.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, like, I guess I'll mention like one more like little thing I'm sort of working on. There was this really kind of compelling Bigfoot sighting in 2014 that this 15-year-old and his father, the father and the 15-year-old, takes place in, it's about 45 miles away from Omaha. And it's this little tiny, again, a little tiny village called Linwood, which I don't even think it has 100 people living there. It's really just like 7 houses and a grain silo. But this father and son lived there, and this father was accompanying his son, driving him to driver's ed in Fremont, Nebraska. The son was driving because he's 15. He's getting practice on the way to driver's ed. It's early in the morning, about 5:30, because the class was like at 6. So they're driving there, and they see a gigantic, I think they described it as like over 8 foot tall Bigfoot walk in 2 strides across this country road. That I've actually been to the site of it, and it's kind of covered with trees and leads right into this place called Skull Creek. And so this thing walks across the road in two bounds, hops over this like wire fence and goes into the creek. The father and son see this thing. They skip driver's ed class that day, and they go to the sheriff of Butler County, and they tell him all about it. And so this case actually got reported in the newspaper. The father and son will not give their names. They want no part of any kind of fame or any kind of notoriety. They do not want people knowing about it. And it kind of stirred this town up, and people started talking about more sightings that they'd had in the local area. It turns out there's been quite a few for decades, right? And I was able to so they did an investigation. A couple people from the Eastern Division of the game warden of Nebraska, which the game warden in Nebraska is a pretty big deal. Like it's like, it's about as big as being a congressman around here. Hunting is huge.
Yeah.
He came out and it's funny. I had been trying to call him for about 6 months, and his voice message thing was always full. And I'm like, I'll never get through this guy. And then one afternoon, I get done like writing. I crack a beer on my porch, and I'm like, I'm going to try to call this guy again. I call him, and I go, hello, sir. My name's Steve. He answers the phone. I'm like, hello, sir. My name's Steve Berg. I'm a writer of kind of folklore of Nebraska, and I'm calling because you investigated this case in 2014 of the Bigfoot encounter. He goes, hold on. I'm going to stop you right there. I go, okay. And I thought he was mad at me for calling about woo-woo stuff. And he goes, not 5 minutes ago, I had another someone called in about seeing a Bigfoot in that exact same area. I go, whoa, that's kind of weird. He goes, that's very weird. He's like, is someone putting you up to this? And I'm like, oh, no, sir. I'm just calling about this.
No, sir, no.
And he was so weirded out about the timing. He's like, I've literally not thought about that case since 2014. And then you call about that exact area. So he was like, it was kind of an interesting synchronicity. He was kind of thrown off. But he talked to me for about a half hour, and he was like, I'll tell you what, Steve. And he goes, before that case in 2014, I'd heard about this stuff, and we never really checked it out. He's like, I checked it out because I was a friend of the sheriff of the county. But after I checked it out, I started checking out more cases, and there is quite a few of these things. He's like a few months ago, I went out to a farmer's property where he had this kind of like I don't know what you call it, that aluminum kind of like, you know, that wavy aluminum stuff that like you build a shed with,
corrugated aluminum.
Exactly. He went out to a farmer's place where he found Bigfoot tracks. The farmer said he saw it like bounding through his like property, like in his crops. And he saw it, the farmer witnessed it going over to the shed and tearing it up. And the game warden was like, oh my God. He's like, if I did, you know, like people speak well as farmers. So he went and checked it out. And he's like, I checked out this shed, Steve. He said, he kept on saying my name, which I thought was like old school and funny. He's like, Steve, I saw this thing. It was coiled up like a giant, like something that was like 20 times stronger than a human being. He's like, it was like torn like paper. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I don't know what can do that. I go, sir, I don't know what can do that either. He's like, what I've learned about this stuff is that a lot of people believe they're seeing this stuff. And I think there's something to it. He's like, I'm not saying I believe in Bigfoot, but I know there's something to it because these are some honest people I'm talking with. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty good information. And then I ended up talking to the sheriff of Butler County who investigated the thing. And he's like, I grew up with the father. We went to high school together. I've known the kid the son he saw with. He's on the honor roll. He's the nicest kid I've ever met. There is no way they're lying. And I said, the sheriff said that to me. I go, so are you saying to me that you think that he saw Bigfoot? He's like, I don't know what they saw. All I know is they're not lying about what they saw. He's like, I'm not saying I believe in Bigfoot. He's like, don't quote me on that. I'm like, I'm not. And he was a very no nonsense, not a super nice sheriff, but he was nice enough to talk to me for a little bit. But he did say like, I completely think these two people are telling the truth about what they saw. You know, he's like, either they misidentified it, but and I was like, well, are there other cases in the area? He's like, they are, but I don't really feel like talking about them right now. I go, fair enough, sir. Thank you for your time. So
yeah. You don't want to piss off the cop who's giving you, nuggets of gold.
No, exactly. But there is one small diner there, or like a little cafe, and actually the weather is now nice. But early next week, I'm going to drive out there, and I'm going to leave a flyer that says, if anyone's had a weird experience or seeing Bigfoot, please email this email address. So I'm kind of doing that, and I've done that in a couple other places where they've had sightings, and I haven't got anything back yet, but I'm really trying everything I can to get these stories because I know this stuff is happening or people are having these experiences that they believe to be real, but I don't think they're reporting it. So
while you're at that diner, ask the waitress if she knows anybody.
Because she's probably heard stories at the counter.
Oh, yeah.
Old guys drinking coffee every morning. And somebody has told somebody else something, and she's overheard it.
Yeah. And like doing this, like putting up a flyer or trying to like ingratiate yourself with locals.
The flyer's a good idea, too.
Yeah, it's a place to
sit
start.
Sit there and drink coffee and make friends with the servers.
I agree. I mean,
and then ask.
And it looked for Keel in Point Pleasant, or it worked for Keel in Point Pleasant. Like he always said, the first thing I do is go to the police and let them know what they're doing and if they have anything for me. So I'm really interested. Police. Yeah, it's like
always check out the local watering hole because that's a place where people unwind, talk about their day. And honestly, if you want to know something in a town and you have an in with the food service and drink service mafia, which is what we call the grapevine of all the restaurants in a town.
Right.
If you can get one person to be talking to you, they can put the word out and get information. So that's always a thing.
Those are great recommendations. Yeah, because I mean, like I really like. To me, in like my older age, I guess I like this folksy approach of just going to like like I honestly like as opposed to like like because I've been like combing over like databases of like these old NICAP, CUFOS, MUFON and stuff, and that's all great and dandy and fun, but I really crave to get out there myself. One, because I like adventure, and I guess I'm craving adventure in my like this paranormal adventuring, but like. two, I think just getting out and talking to people, you can really learn a lot. You know,
Yes, yes, you
and
can.
maybe force synchronicities into your life by looking at this thing
That
even deeper.
too.
You know, so
That too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just really having a ball because it's living in California for. I actually lived in LA longer than I lived anywhere in my life, and I love LA and I loved living in a big city for 20 years. But I'm kind of like really enjoying this chapter of coming back to where I'm from, my roots, and I guess because I don't think anyone else is doing what I'm doing. I'm not trying to like be braggadocious, but like just look, I don't know of anyone else who's like looking at high strangeness in that kind of Keelian way other than myself. I wish there was more people because I could definitely use the help.
I know
wish
of
there's,
one
you know,
person.
in Nebraska.
One person, not in Nebraska though.
Oh.
In western New York State in the Hudson River Valley.
Really?
Mysterious Beauty is the name of her book.
And what's it about? The book?
It is about UFOs, Bigfoot, weird little lights, ghosts,
In Nebraska?
spiritualists.
No, in the Hudson
New
River
York
Valley.
State.
In the Hudson River.
Hudson
Got
River
you,
Valley.
Got you.
But she did what you are doing now for Western New York State.
Yeah.
From a Keelian perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a few investigators looking at it that way.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure there. Yeah, I mean, it's like I feel like there probably are. I would hope so. There are in almost every state that I don't know about. But like when I came here, I kind of thought I was going to be able to find like a half a dozen people who were kind of like me and were doing this, but I was dead wrong about that. You know, the only person I can sort of find was Ray Boeche, but he's kind of like not in the best health, and he's sort of like, you know, getting older where he can't do the boots in the ground stuff. But, you know,
right.
I'm just hungry for it. And like, look, if anyone out there has a Nebraska story or something going on, I get in touch with me. I will check it out. You can talk to me. I will listen. So yeah, I'm really just like desperate and hungry to absorb all the information because I feel like it's like maybe my little tiny contribution to the field, you know, like,
right.
you know, I'll be the journalist on the ground covering Nebraska.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's genius.
Aw,
I think
yeah,
that's
so
a great idea.
If anything, it's
can
really
put
fun.
People can put a comment on this episode when it goes up, or they can email us at 6djk67@gmail.com, and I can get you in touch with Steve.
Yes,
so
please. Thank you.
I will pass it along.
Aw, thanks.
Always.
I appreciate that.
Because,
yeah, anything's valuable. Nothing too small,
Yes.
nothing too big.
They're not even ghost hunters there.
There's
gotta be ghost hunters.
You know, I take that back. There is definitely ghost hunters here, but you know, I mean, I'm not meaning this as a blanket statement, but like I have like met and contacted a couple of these groups. They are really, really strictly about ghosts.
Ghost.
Yeah, they.
That's fair.
Yeah, it's fair and that's fine.
You should ask them to forward you any cases that they think don't fit ghosts but are still weird.
I never thought about that. Oh, that's so smart. Oh my gosh. I'm actually writing that down. Hold on.
Yeah,
such a good idea.
Because see, you never know. You never know.
You never know. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
always look at their stuff if there's like any poltergeist activity.
Totally.
You just keep an ear to what they're doing.
I'm trying.
Maybe you can trade cases back and forth.
I'm hoping it's been kind of odd. They've been like, it's so interesting how uninterested they are in cryptids and UFOs. I've kind of found where I'm like, oh yeah, there's also all this stuff going on here, and they're like, oh yeah, that's cool. Good luck with that. And I'm like, you're not interested in that too? Like, it's funny to me when people are only interested in one aspect of the field. That I guess I couldn't be further away from that. Where to me, everything is on the table. You know, like I'm interested in all of it. I'm interested in tarot. I'm interested in like everything in the occult. You know, true crime. I feel like it all plays a part in a way. You know, so
yeah.
But that's fine. They have their approach and I have mine. So I mean, I'm not, you know, one's better than
but
the
always share information if you can, because you never know what you're gonna pick up.
I agree. Oh yeah,
and you don't know how important it'll be to a case.
Right.
Maybe not now. Maybe later.
Yeah, and I'm always willing to help out. And if people have more questions about like in greater detail about some of the things I've talked about, hit me up. I will like. I love talking about this stuff, and I could talk about it all day. And it's really what I love in life the most. It's a real fun lens to look through life with. You know, to like.
Oh yeah.
Our world's been so disenchanted, and like in that like I'm trying to enchant my own world, and to me, I'm just having a lot more fun that way.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
more fun.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean I'm
Right.
not skeptical or discerning either. You know, just
Right.
open-minded, trying to have fun.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming back because we totally fumbled the ball last time and had too much fun talking
We were
about all
having-
the other stuff.
But it was fun.
We
Though.
had a
I
blast.
had so much fun. It was, it was a get to know each other. We were breaking bread, so
Yeah. It was good. And you're welcome back.
Oh, anytime.
Yeah, well, I would
Yeah.
come back anytime. And look, it's weird. I've only met you guys. Well, no, Barbara, we've hung out 3 times now. Once in real
Yeah.
life, 2 virtually. But you guys are very wonderful people, and it's like I'm excited to have 2 new friends in this field. Like so.
Thank you.
Yeah, it means it
That
does
is
mean
the best
it does mean
part.
a lot to me. Like Barbara, when you said I could call you after something weird happened, I'm like that really like. I'm
Dude,
not just saying that. It warms
seriously.
my heart because I don't know who I would call. I would call like I have some friends like Cutchin and Greg Bishop. I would obviously call them, but like I would call you in a second, and I would be very like I feel like Barbara. Okay, I can't. I'm just trying to catch my breath, But like that is such a sweet offer, and I really
No,
means a lot to me.
totally.
Thank you so much.
I would listen to your Bigfoot encounter and just be like, dude, how did you get away, man?
Yeah. Well, look, in 2023, I'm going to make something happen. I'll tell you that much. I'm going for it.
All right. Good
I'm
for
going
you.
for it.
Well, thank you for coming back.
Absolutely. Happy New Year, my friends.
Happy New Year to you. Well, that's all for this week's episode of the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. If you have any questions or thoughts about the podcast or would like to come and talk about your experiences of the paranormal, you can contact us at 6djk67@gmail.com. We promise to even answer you, and we are always happy to hear from you. Thank you.